Hello, everyone on cyberspace. And I say this particularly to everybody who's watching because this is not a live class. This is pre-recorded. I will not be able to give a class tonight, unfortunately, and I wanted to still give the class. So it is going to be pre-recorded and put on YouTube for the world to benefit from. So it's good to start with some charities. So grab your favorite coin or dollar bill and put it into your nearest pushka, your nearest charity box. Okay. If you would like to sponsor a class, this class or an upcoming class in honor of anything, or just because, please reach out to rabbi@jewisherie.com. And also, if you have any questions on today's class, you'd like to get some clarity and clarification, please reach out to the same email address. Okay. Also, if you'd like to get the curriculum for the class, you can email me as well, and I will send you a PDF of that. Okay. So the trauma of the spies and its lessons. Optimism doesn't mean being naive. The majority isn't always right. And modernity isn't an enemy. Lessons from the spies of Moses and Joshua. So, two spies, we'll elaborate more on this as we go along. Two spies enter the land of Israel and gather intelligence. They report their findings back to their superiors. The mission goes ahead and is successful. This is not the story of this week's Torah portion, because 40 years prior, which is the subject of this week's portion, 12 spies attempted the same mission with a disastrous outcome for the Jewish people. So today is a class on missions with a focus and our role in this world, based on a talk from the Lubavitcher Rebbe from the summer 1983. Okay. Section A, if you do get the booklet from me, the curriculum, it's in section A, page 3 in the booklet. The successful spies and the failed spies. So let's start off with learning about Moses' spies, and then we'll learn about Joshua's spies 40 years later. So Moses' spies is the subject of the beginning of this week's Torah portion, or most of the portion. This is in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verses 17 through 23, and 25 through 33. So let's start off with the mission. Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, which is the land of Israel, and told them, go up in the south and climb the mountain. You will see what kind of land it is and the character of its inhabitants. Are they strong or weak? Few or many? What kind of land is it? Good or bad? Are its cities fortified or not? Is the land bountiful or barren? Does it have trees? Be brave and take from the fruit of the land. It was the season when the first grapes begin to ripen. Spying for dummies. This is a quote from the Midrash Rabbah on these verses, where the Moses said, the character of its inhabitants, are they strong or weak, few or many? What kind of land is it? Says the Midrash. How is their strength assessed? If they live in unfortified cities, unwalled cities, they are strong and rely on their own strength. If they live in fortified cities, they are weak and cowardly, because somebody who's big and strong doesn't need to protect themselves with walls. Execution. Let's see what happened. How did they fare in this mission? They went up and explored the land, from the desert of Tzin until Rehov at the entrance of Hamat. They went up to the south, and he went to Hebron, and encountered the giants, Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. Hebron was built 7 years prior to the city of Tzoan in Egypt. Verses continue. When they reached the valley of Eshkol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. They carried it on a pole, 2 of them, along with one from the pomegranates and one from the figs. The land of Israel had ginormous fruit. After 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. Now, if you noticed, if you were paying attention, it said, they went up to the south, and he went to Hebron. Who is this he, and why did he go to Hebron? So Rashi, the famous commentator on the Torah, actually addresses this, and he says, he went up to Hebron. Caleb, I don't know how to pronounce it in English, went there alone to pray at the gravesite of the forefathers, that he not be tested like his fellows. Similarly, the verse says, to him I will give the land upon which he stepped. And another verse states, and Caleb was given Hebron. Due to the importance of this mission and the danger associated with it, Caleb wished to visit Hebron and pray for success at the tombs of the patriarchs. As a reward, he and his descendants were given this city as an inheritance. So they went to the land of Israel, they checked it out, and let's see what the results they came back with. The debriefing, page 4 in your booklet. They went and they came to Moses and Aaron and the entire Jewish people in the land of the desert of Paran in Kadesh. They brought them and the entire people a report, and they showed them the fruits of the land. They recounted to them, "We went to the land you sent us, and it flows with milk and honey, and these are its fruits. However, the inhabitants are mighty and live in large fortified cities. We also saw giants there." Amalek, who had attacked the Jewish people not too long before, on their way out of Egypt. Amalek dwells in the south, and the Hittites, this is hard to read in English, I'm going to say it in Hebrew. The Chittim, the Yevusim, and the Amorim, 3 different types of nations, live in the mountains. The Canaanites dwell on the coast and along the Jordan River. So if the spies wanted to convince the people not to settle in the land, which is what they were trying to do, actually, as we'll see, why did they begin by praising it? This is a very simple question. If they're trying to badmouth the land of Israel, why did they start by saying how beautiful it is? Simple answer, says Rashi, flows with milk and honey. Rashi says, a lie that doesn't begin with a kernel of truth will not be believed. This is people say this still today, that a good lie is always based on some sort of truth, a little bit of truth. Feeling inferior, page 5 in your booklets. So the verses continue. Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, he argued with them. He was one of the good spies, one of the only 2 good spies. "We can certainly go up and possess the land, for we can overcome it. But the men who went up with him said, we cannot go up against this nation, for they are stronger than us. They spread a negative report about the land which they had scouted to the Jews, saying, the land which we scouted is a land that consumes its inhabitants, and the people we saw are men of stature. We also saw the giants, and we were grasshoppers in our eyes and in their eyes." 2 points on this. One is, when they said, we cannot go up against this nation, for they are stronger than us. In the Hebrew, this is one of those things where to understand this and to appreciate it fully, you need to read it in the Hebrew. There's actually, I have this thought to start giving a Hebrew reading course here in Erie. We'll see what happens. It's just a thought at the moment. There is a prepared course available for me to use, but let's see if that goes anywhere. Regardless, the verse says, "Ki chazak hu mimenu," that this nation is stronger than us. Now, the word mimenu is stronger than us. That's what the word means. Mimenu, than us. It also has another meaning. It can also be read stronger than him. Mimenu can mean, and just if anybody speaks Hebrew, it could be than us or than him, or from us or from him. The underlying message what they're trying to give across was that they're even stronger than him, than God, and we can't do it. Obviously, that's a big problem to say that. Second point is about them looking at themselves like grasshoppers, and the people of the land looking at them like grasshoppers. Why did the spies think that the giants viewed them as grasshoppers? Says the Sefat Emet. This, the Midrash says, was their sin. Who told them that they were like grasshoppers? How did they know this? Perhaps they were like angels, but it was correct. For because they looked at themselves as inferior, that's how they were perceived by others as well. For everything is dependent on how much we work on ourselves. Being like grasshoppers in the eyes of the giants in the land of Canaan, of Israel, was a problem because of their own inferiority complex. It always works that way. Our self-perception forms the image that we project to others and how others see us. There's a interesting little story that I'll just share right now, briefly. There was one time a Jew who came complaining to I believe it was the Tzemach Tzedek, the 3rd Chabad Rebbe, complaining that everyone steps on me. He goes into shul, he goes to synagogue, and everyone's stepping on him. Nobody's treating him with respect. Nobody's thinking of him as anybody that's worth looking up to or considering his opinion. Everybody steps on me. Everybody steps on me. So the Tzemach Tzedek looked at him and said, well, if you wouldn't spread yourself over the entire floor of the synagogue like a carpet, nobody would step on you. It's the same idea. Any questions so far? Obviously, you'll have to email me. Okay. Now we're going to contrast this failed mission of the spies with the spies of Joshua, which happened 38, 39, 40 years later. So this is source 3 in your booklet, page 5, from the book of Joshua, the beginning of the book. The mission. Joshua, the son of Nun, his father's name was Nun, sent 2 men from Shittim to spy covertly, telling them, "Go and see the land and Jericho." They went and stayed at the home of an innkeeper named Rachav. The king of Jericho was told, "Jewish people came here tonight to scout the land." Sorry, I had to pause the recording there for a second. Okay. So Rashi says in this verse, Joshua he sent them during the mourning period for Moses. Moses passed away, and Joshua didn't waste any time. He was immediately appointed the leader of the Jewish people, and still in the days of mourning of Moses, he had already sent spies to scout out the land and scout out the city of Jericho to find the best way to lead the Jewish people into the land. Okay, page 6, complications. The king of Jericho sent a message to Rachav, this lady who had brought them into her house. "Evict these men who came to your house, for they came to scout the land." She took both men and hid them and said, "Yes, men came, and I did not know where they were from. When it was time to close the gates and it got dark, they left, and I do not know where to. Chase after them quickly, and you will find them." Obviously, that was a lie. She had them hiding in her home, and they had not ran away. They were still there. She had brought them up to the roof and hid them among the stalks of flax laid out on her roof. They pursued them in the direction of the Jordan and through the fords. I looked up the word fords before we started class because I didn't know what the word meant. And the word fords means, from the Oxford Dictionary, a shallow place in a river or stream allowing one to walk or drive across. Obviously, they didn't drive across. There were no cars. They pursued them in the direction of the Jordan and through the fords, and the gates were shut after the pursuers left. Intelligence gathering. Oh. Okay. Something just happened on my screen. I hope it's still recording. Okay. Before they went to sleep, she came up to them on the roof. "I know that God has given you the land, and that your fear is upon us, and that the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you," she told them. "For we have heard how God dried up the sea of reeds before you when you went out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 Amorite kings on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you destroyed. We heard, and our hearts melted, and no spirit rose again in anyone's heart before you. For your God is the God of the heavens above and the earth below." So she basically explained to them how terrified they were. The inhabitants of the land of Canaan were of the Jewish people. Fleeing the city. Rachav's house was built in the city walls, so she lowered them down through her window with a rope. "Go to the mountains so the pursuers don't harm you," she told them. "Hide there for 3 days until the pursuers return here, and then go on your way." They went to the mountains and stayed there for 3 days until the pursuers left. The pursuers looked for them on all the roads and could not find them. Page 7, the report. Here's what happened. The 2 men went down the mountain and returned to Joshua and told him everything that had happened to them. And they said, "God has delivered the entire land into our hands, and the inhabitants have melted away before us." So we see that these spies, not only did they come back with a positive attitude, their entire perspective was completely radically different than the original spies. But let's pinpoint on one core difference. So let's see the Rebbe's words. Page 7. Moses' spies misunderstood their mission. It wasn't a simple, they made a mistake along the way, or they as they were on the trip, they perceived something that they rubbed them the wrong way. Rather, their entire, in Yiddish, you'd say gang, their entire attitude, their entire perspective, even before they started the mission, was flawed. But we'll get to that soon. The spies are clearly perceived as the bad guys in their story, as they spoke negatively about the land. But what was wrong with their report? Sometimes in order to get clarity, you have to ask questions. They were sent to scout the land and report back whatever they saw, and that is what they did. Why were they and the Jewish people punished for doing their job? They were sent with a mission. Go see what's going on over there. Give us a report about the land. What did they do? They didn't go there and go to a casino or something, or go go on vacation. They went and they were faithful to the mission, seemingly. They went, they spied out the land, came back and gave a report. What did they do wrong? So let's see the Rebbe's words. There are a number of lessons that we can learn from the story of the spies as related in our Torah portion. When we operate on a divine mission, we must know that what the goal of our mission is, which details fall under the scope of our mission, and which do not. This point is illustrated in our Torah portion. The goal of the spies' mission was to scout out the land to see what would be the best way to conquer it. The sin of the spies was that they went beyond the scope of the mission. How so? Not only did they report about the situation in the land of Israel, that the cities were well fortified, which is an important piece of information for deciding on a battle strategy, right? They also added their personal conclusion that the land is flowing with milk and honey, but we will not be able to conquer it because the locals are stronger than us. This was a departure from the charter of their mission. They weren't sent in order to determine if the Jewish people could conquer the land. They were sent to determine how to go about conquering it. So the spies weren't asked to decide, will this mission be successful? What do you think? Based on your analysis. That's not what they were asked. They weren't asked if we can conquer the land. They were asked to figure out how. Their roles as spies was to gather intelligence, not to offer their personal analysis and conclusions. When someone on a mission forgets their role and starts making the decisions, it is a recipe for disaster. The spies presented to the Jewish people a report that didn't just include information, but also their personal conclusion that the mission was impossible. They departed from their charter and sabotaged their mission. This is why they were punished. Moses gave them a mission to check out the land, come back, what is going on there? What is the best way to conquer it? They came back and said, it's not happening, Moses. It's too difficult. It's impossible. And there's no hope. It's just not going to work. That right there was the problem. No one wouldn't ask them for their personal thoughts on the matter. They were asked to give a report, and that is all they were supposed to do. Now, I'm just going to point out here, there are many different angles to how to look at what the problem, what the mistake, what was the negative aspect of what they said. There's different angles, and they're all connected. There's an underlying principle which they were coming from, which we'll see at the end of the lesson. But there are many different factors here that are what's the word I'm looking for? They were not correct. That they shouldn't have done it this way. Although on a very simple level, it seems that everything looked peachy, hunky-dory. Let's see the Joshua spies. Joshua's spies understood their mission. Page 8. The spies that Joshua sent, about whom we read in this week's Haftorah, conducted themselves differently than Moses' spies did in this regard. We read both stories on the same Shabbos in order to learn the lesson from their differences. Joshua's spies carried out their mission properly, as we read in the Haftorah. The spies said to Joshua, God has delivered the entire land into our hands, and the inhabitants have melted away before us. This was per the charter of their mission. They had been asked to investigate if the locals had already begun to fear the Jews, after hearing about the many miracles God performed for them, or if it was still necessary to intimidate and frighten them. The reason the spies hid for 3 days was so that they could return to Joshua and report the completion of their mission. By contrast, the spies of Moses did not act properly because they added their personal conclusions, which was beyond the scope of their mission. Joshua's spying expedition almost failed. The spies were almost caught, and they need to spend 3 days in hiding. But this did not thwart their mission. They still returned with the necessary information to help Joshua make the appropriate decisions. They didn't offer their own conclusions or provide information they weren't asked for. This is why they were successful. They were true to their mission, true to their goal, and true to Joshua. Section B, page 9 in your booklet. Don't ask if, ask how. Says the Rebbe, positive attitude. The lesson we learn from this is clear. We always need to have a lesson. It's important to, when we're learning Torah, it's important to understand the content at hand. It's also important to realize that the word Torah means hora'ah. The word Torah comes from the word horah, which means lesson or instruction. That every word, every sentence, every aspect in Torah has an underlying message that it's trying to teach us in our day-to-day lives to act as Jews. The lesson we learn from this is clear. When we are working on a divine mission, we must realize that we certainly have the ability to complete it. In the words of our Torah portion, we can surely go up and take possession of the land, for we can overcome it, in the words of Caleb. Rashi comments on we can surely go up, that even if it is in the heavens, and Moses tells us to make ladders and climb up to the heaven, we will succeed at anything he instructs us, provided that we follow the instructions. When we are given a mission, even one which seems beyond reach, like climbing to the heavens, we are also certainly given all the capabilities necessary to complete it. Since we are acting with the power of the one who sent us, we will certainly succeed in completing every aspect of the mission. Thorough preparation. What we need to do is scout the land and see what the specific issues in this place require correction. In simple terms, when we see that in this particular place, any particular place, there is a deficiency in the observance of family purity, kosher, Shabbat candle lighting, or something similar, we know that we need to get to work on this specific issue. The verse states, page 10, see what the land is like. Is it fertile or poor? These details are relevant in order to determine what we need to do in this land. If it is a fertile land that we need to bring the choice first fruits, then we need to bring the choice first fruits, which is Hebrew called bikurim, as an offering to God. But if the land is poor, then there are no bikurim. Preparing for our personal mission. The same applies to the personal mission that each of us have. When we find ourselves in a particular place, we must investigate the circumstances of that place and its residents. If it is a poor land in the material sense, then we need to advance the mitzvah of charity. And if it is a poor land in the sense of Jewish literacy, then we need to start with teaching them the basics of Judaism. If the place is rich on Jewish literacy, then we need to build on that and raise the level of Jewish knowledge and observance even higher. So, different people will carry out the same mission in different ways. A natural optimist will be certain that everything will go smoothly. Everything's going to be just fine and dandy. They're ready to begin right away. They don't need to consider it or take time to think about it. It's all going to be A-okay. But some people have a more realistic approach. Like the famous joke, the famous line, that a pessimist is an optimist with experience. Right? They want to look more into it. They need to sleep on it, consult with others, make a press meeting, and often they doubt in the viability of the initiative. Only after they feel sufficiently certain are they in. When it comes to the missions assigned to us by a creator, on the other hand, which is our purpose in this world, we need to take the good of both approaches, the optimistic approach and the realist approach, let's call it. When we learn from the optimist that this mission is within our abilities and we can fulfill it, then we can fulfill it. If God gave us a challenge, we can certainly meet it. We must also learn from the second type of person and prepare properly. Faith in God that the mission will be successful doesn't mean we can approach it in a lazy fashion and just like, I don't have to do anything. It'll all work out. We need to prepare responsibly and find the best way to approach this mission and to accomplish it. Just a story that highlights this point. Rabbi Norbert Weinberg was an educator in New York. He became depressed, hopeless, when his efforts weren't seeing any success. After meeting with the Rebbe, he came out with a completely different perspective. This is his story. I had shared my dilemma with the Rebbe, explaining to him that not seeing any success with my students makes me feel despondent. Perhaps I should leave the teaching profession and study medicine or law. You are asking me, the Rebbe replied, what importance it is to teach these children. These young kids are guiltless. They're not to blame. They're just starting out their life. Each of them could become the greatest people, the greatest of Jews. You're asking me if it's worthwhile to teach them? Even a murderer on the way to execution would have to make a blessing on a cup of water the same way a tzaddik, a saintly person, would have to. How then can you deny this child the opportunity to recite a blessing? To teach a child to make a blessing, what can be greater? I was absolutely stunned. During all my time in education, such a perspective had never, ever occurred to me. As we were leaving, his final words of advice to me were, don't worry about it. Don't worry about what they will or won't do. You just try your best with them, and their mitzvos will have strength on their own. That audience with the Rebbe made a huge difference in my life. It gave me the strength to go on. When I realized that any mitzvah that I could plant in the children would have a force of its own, as the Rebbe had said, I knew that my effort would not be wasted. A rabbi doesn't have an easy life. As Moses put it, a little longer and they will stone me. It's not an easy thing. And yet it doesn't matter anymore to me because I know that any mitzvah I can plant in them is going to have a force of its own and it'll do what it has to do. Fascinating. Okay, bottom of page 10, do it yourself. The basic directive here is that we must scout the land ourselves. We can't wait for a divine voice or a prophet to call out to us and instruct us to go to to act in a certain area. We need to go ourselves and scout the land to see what are the most important matters for us to occupy ourselves with in this place. Page 11, as explained, the mission of scouting the land is only to investigate the circumstances of the place in order to know which matters need to be dealt with first. It isn't our job to determine whether we have the ability to succeed, because knowing that this is God's mission and we are acting with his power, it is certain that, quote, we can surely go up and take possession of the land, for we can overcome it. But there's an important point, very important point. The Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, which when people hear Code of Jewish Law, they imagine that this is something lawyers read. Or people deep who want to deepen, is that a word? Deepen their knowledge in the intricacies of Jewish law. Jewish law is for Jews, not for lawyers. It's not for lawmakers. It's for people like you and me. The Code of Jewish Law is a guidebook for us to read and learn from and to understand how we're supposed to act as Jews. Very down-to-earth language. The Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, begins with a very important, the beginning of the whole thing. It's a huge set of books. It starts with this law, Al Yevish Mipnei Hamaligim, which means do not be embarrassed from those who are scoffing, who are making fun. You're trying to progress in your Judaism, trying to grow, and people look and they go, "What are you doing? You're putting on tefillin. You're lighting these candles you're lighting these candles Friday evening. What are you doing?" Stop with this silly stuff, right? The Shulchan Aruch puts this as like the core thing that we have to start our whole approach to Judaism with, is not to be afraid or embarrassed from people who look and think strangely of us. Ignore the cynics. Page 11. There is an additional lesson for us here. Even when we hear from a group of 10 people, a full quorum, a full minyan, that we can't go up against those people, they are stronger than we are, we should not be concerned. The spies in the story, there were 12 spies. 2 of them were faithful to the mission. 10 of them were not. In fact, we learn the idea of praying with a minyan of 10 Jews from the story of the spies. We have been given the ability not to be influenced by the words of the spies, just like Joshua was protected. As the verse states, Moses renamed Hoshea bin Nun Yehoshua. Yehoshua, Joshua, his name was not originally Joshua. The Hebrew is Yehoshua. His name originally was Hoshea, with the first 2 letters not there. They were just, the first letter. His name was Hoshea without the additional yud at the beginning. Moses prayed for him and added a letter to his name, a letter yud, little tiny letter yud, Yehoshua. And Rashi explains that adding this letter Yud had an indicative message, which was he prayed that God, which is Yud and letter Hey, this is one of Hashem's names, that God should deliver you from the conspiracy of the spies. Even after the 10 spies expressed their opinion that it would be impossible to conquer the land because the locals are too powerful and their cities are too well fortified, Caleb was able to single-handedly attract the attention of the entire nation to his words. As the verse states, Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We can surely go up and take possession of the land, for we can overcome it." Had the spies not intervened after that, the people would have merited to enter the land immediately and wouldn't have had to wander in the desert for 40 years. The majority isn't always right. Another layer to this, not only to not be embarrassed and not be concerned with what people are saying, but even if there are a majority, there are a large majority, majority isn't always right. This is the response to those who argue, page 12, by the way. This is a response to those who argue that we need to reckon with the position of the majority who aren't particular about observing all elements of Torah and its commandments. What weight can the majority opinion carry when it represents only their personal opinions against the opinion of an individual who isn't expressing his personal opinion, but rather God's words as related to Moses? In other words, we shouldn't care about the numerical majority or minority. Rather, we should focus on the substance. Fulfilling God's will is preferable over listening to the personal opinions of human beings. We all sometimes find ourselves in situations where the people around us tell us that we're mistaken. But in our hearts, we know that we're right. You want to give charity, but your family says it's too much. And during these times, you ought to be saving. Or you want to study more Torah. But your friends laugh and ask you if you suddenly become religious. Maybe they're right, you might think. I'm not an objective party here, and they outnumber me. It's a valid thought. We need to remember the lesson from the spies. The majority isn't always right. Just an interesting little story. This is a Jewish folk story. It probably happened, but let's see. A person tells his friend, recently I was returning from an important trip. On the way, the driver handed out generous shots of vodka to the passengers so we'd be warm and comfortable. It was probably in Russia at some point, back in like the last 100 years or 200 years. The driver also took a swig from the leftover vodka. When we arrived at a crossroads, an argument broke out over the correct way to turn. Most people said to turn left. I was one of the only passengers who didn't drink. I was absolutely certain that we needed to turn right. By the way, reminder for myself, please, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, which I'm pretty sure is down right here. So most people were saying to turn left, and it was clear to me that we're supposed to turn right. I ask you, my friend, should I have conceded to the majority? They were all tipsy and their judgment was impaired. Should I have insisted on my opinion? Obviously, the answer is yes. Oftentimes, the trending values are plain wrong. Even if the upstanding moral people are few in number, they will still insist on following the right way. Jews never played the numbers game. We have always been the smallest nation. We aren't right because of numbers or popularity, but because of our morals. Section C, in the material world. This is going to be page 13 in your booklet. Until now, we examined the Torah reading on its literal level. Chassidus, the Hasidic teachings, explain a deeper underlying layer to this whole story. Behind the spies' words lay hidden agendas and deep spiritual yearnings. The spies were not simple people. They were not like Moses picked out, let's see, okay, the eeny, meeny, miny, mo. It wasn't like that. Moses picked these particular people because they were lofty people. They were holy people. They were very, very wise people. They were mistaken. They made a big mistake, as we'll see in a minute. But they weren't simple. And their mistake was based on a very deep core belief and feeling, which was mistaken. The spies wanted to stay in a spiritual atmosphere, says the Rebbe. There is an additional lesson for us to learn from the story of the spies. Chassidus explains that the spies' logic was that they did not want to enter the land of Israel where they would have to occupy themselves with material matters. They argued that it would be better to stay in the desert where they were free of material concerns. This mistake of the spies and their generation was that God actually wanted them to be involved in worldly matters. The mistake was that God really wanted them to be involved in material matters, worldly matters, and to act properly within the material world. Meaning, the spies didn't merely make a technical blunder, expressing an uncalled for opinion. Their entire worldview, their understanding of the meaning of life and destiny was completely flawed. The spies felt that living in the desert was absolutely perfect. Perfect. The Jews didn't have to bother with small little daily activities. They were disconnected from worldliness, from materialism. Their sustenance, the manna, rained down from the heaven. Their water came from Miriam's well. Their air was pure. Their clothing fixed itself. They studied Torah all day with Moses himself. Can you imagine? It was paradise on earth. What more could you ask for? Going to scout the land, they were shocked to see normal life, something they'd long forgotten. The farmers go out to work at dawn and work until exhaustion in order to feed their families. The spies looked at this with fear, wondering, how could they survive this? How could they work so hard all day, tilling the land, sowing the land, reaping the land in order to make a living, and then at the end of the day, after all this exhausting work, to have enough energy to study Torah? How could they observe the mitzvos? They concluded that they must remain in the desert. It would be better to stay enveloped in their spiritual lives. So it wasn't simply that they went into the land and they saw what was going on. They said, oh, this is not for us. Why did they even think that? What was going on in their minds and their hearts in the first place that caused them to react like that? Because their entire worldview was completely flawed. That they felt that where it's at is to live a spiritual paradise, is to not be involved with the world, to not be involved with people, to just connect to God, be a hermit. But the spies forgot the idea behind creation. In the lofty spiritual worlds, there are plenty of angels. The reason for creating this world, the physical world, and giving the Torah was for physical people to live physical lives with everything that entails, dealing with challenges, disappointments, and pitfalls, but still remaining connected to God. Don't run from the world. Last little chunk here. The lesson from this is clear. Our role is not to be aloof from worldly matters, says the Rebbe. On the contrary, we are tasked with using worldly matters for holy pursuits. For example, the existence of radio technology needs to be utilized for broadcasting Torah classes in the local language, which is what we're doing right now. Not exactly radio, but it's internet. With publicity, the same applies to all worldly matters. Similarly, when God blesses us with more money than we need, we shouldn't run away from it because wealth is a difficult test, which it is. On the contrary, we should embrace it and use the money to give charity to Jewish educational institutions and the like. We don't even have the ability to remain in the desert. We weren't privy to that background. We were born into a fast-paced existence, and one who doesn't find it, and one who doesn't fit in it finds themselves on the sidelines. But we can repeat the spy's blunder in our own lives. The world continues to evolve year after year, with advances in technology bringing everything to our fingertips: radio, television, internet, AI. You name it, we got it. With such abundance, we have so many more opportunities to become wealthy, live well, tour the world, order products from anywhere to our doorstep, and go places our ancestors could only have dreamed of. We might tell ourselves that these advances are fraught with danger. How will we learn Torah? Contact with the outside world brings so much temptation. It might be better to just cut ourselves off from it completely. Technology can be so dangerous, it's better to just lock ourselves up in a synagogue and study Torah to protect our spiritual lives. While there is merit to such an approach, that's not the way we're supposed to act. Hasidic wisdom informs us that this was precisely the spy's mistake. We need to learn from them to do the opposite. Some people you need to learn from to act like them, and some people you need to learn from to do the opposite of what they do. I'm sure you know the famous story, the riddle. A guy comes to a crossroads, another crossroads story, and there's two people, and he wants to figure out where to go. And some little kid says, these two guys, they're very interesting people. One of them always tells the truth, and the other one always lies. Always. So, how's he supposed to know what to do? If he goes to one guy, maybe he's telling the truth, maybe he's not. Maybe he's the other guy. He doesn't know who's who. And there's a solution to the story, which is basically that he goes and asks either one, what would the other guy tell me? And do the opposite. I don't know the exact details. We're not going to get into it now. I'm sure somebody who is familiar more with the joke can enlighten us on the comments. So we need to learn from them to do the opposite. Instead of barricading ourselves and fleeing from the world, we need to live in the world and use all advances in technology for spiritual gain. Doing so, we won't be grasshoppers. We will conquer the land and transform the world into a better place. Any questions or comments or jokes, as I usually say, please, you can respond in the comments. You can send me an email, rabbi@jewisherie.com. And wishing you all a great week and a good Shabbos. And a reminder, by the way, that we're having our monthly minyan right here at Chabad of Erie. and you are invited to come join 10:30 a.m. on Shabbos. All right. Have a great rest of your week.